The night of April 1991 at Blackwater Falls began like any other mountain night in West Virginia, silent, bone-chillingly cold, and no one could have guessed it would become the biggest unsolved crack in Tucker County history. In just a few short minutes, a pained cry echoing from deep in the woods dragged the entire community into an unprecedented whirlwind of mystery. A panicked witness described a scene so bizarre it sent chills down the spine. A young woman giving birth alone in the darkness, her face obscured by hair, blood, and terror. When he returned with the ranger, that woman had vanished without a trace. Only a pool of cold blood remained, a piece of cloth diaper, and drag marks leading into the endless black beneath the canopy. In the days that followed, search teams scoured every meter of forest with flashlights, paper maps, and exhausted K-9 units, but instead of answers, they only uncovered more questions that plunged the entire town into decades of unease. Rumors spread like mountain wind: a dark-colored car seen leaving the woods that night without headlights, a stranger who appeared and disappeared, an evidence box opened without authorization, and a piece of diaper that vanished from storage as if it had never existed. Investigators gave the case a spine-chilling name: Blackwater Mother Mystery. 31 years later, an anonymous letter suddenly appeared, scrawled in a trembling tone, "I know the real mother is still alive," and from that exact moment, the truth, or the closest thing to the truth, began to rise from the darkness. Before we dive deep into this shocking true story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys in search of forgotten justice, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next part. The last night of April 1991, the mountain chill of Appalachia hung thick over the wet trails of Blackwater Falls State Park. There was no rain, but the fog was so dense, it clung to every tree branch and rock slab like steam. Mark Winslow, 32, a trail maintenance worker from the city of Elkins, was walking back to the parking lot after a late shift. His flashlight beam flickered through the milky air, barely illuminating a few steps ahead. Half a mile from the lot, Mark stopped dead. A strange sound rose from the forest, not an animal, not the wind, but a pained, broken, faint moan. He strained to listen. A shiver shot down his spine. The moan came again, clearer this time, coming from the woods to his right, not far away. Mark stepped slowly into the darkness, his flashlight shaking slightly in his hand. The smell of damp earth, mixed with something metallic, like rust, filled his nose. Then suddenly, the beam swept across a shape on the ground. Mark gasped. A young woman lay on her side against a tree trunk, shaking violently, her coat disheveled, hair matted with sweat and blood, covering half her face. Her legs were drawn up in a position that left no mistake. She was in labor. Blood soaked into the decayed leaves beneath her, forming a dark red patch. Mark stood frozen for several seconds before hearing her whisper, broken and weak, "Please, get help, go get someone. Hurry." Her voice trembled, but was filled with desperation, as if she knew she couldn't hold on much longer. Mark nodded frantically, even though she could barely see him in the dark. "I'm going now. Hold on, I'll be back with the ranger." He turned and ran, nearly slipping on the wet ground, his breath coming in ragged bursts. The flashlight bounced wildly as he ran, throwing chaotic streaks of light. Mark knew the nearest ranger cabin was more than a mile away, but he didn't stop, his heart pounding so hard it hurt his chest. When he reached it, he pounded on the door, and told Ranger Tom Devereux there was a woman giving birth in the woods. The two of them raced back immediately, but when they returned to the exact spot, the same tree, the same patch of ground Mark had burned into his memory, everything was different. No woman, no baby, only a pool of blood still wet among the leaves, a blood-soaked cloth diaper tossed to the side, as if yanked away in a hurry, and faint drag marks disappearing deep into the dark forest. There were no clear footprints, but something about the scene made the air feel colder than the Appalachian night itself. Ranger Tom immediately radioed the main station, his voice tight. "We have a possible emergency, involving a woman in labor, and now missing. Request immediate assistance." The report of woman giving birth and vanished in the woods. instantly lit up the entire Tucker County Ranger Station in the dead of night. No one had time to ask questions or speculate about what had really happened. They only knew that in the freezing Appalachian Mountains, every passing minute could decide the life of a mother and a newborn child. Roughly 30 minutes after Ranger Tom's call, the first SAR search and rescue team was on the move. A 4-man crew carrying high-powered flashlights, radios, reflective jackets, and 2 K9s trained to track human blood headed out from the cabin, following the dirt road Mark Winslow had led them back along. There was no GPS. In 1991, civilian units weren't reliable yet, so paper maps were spread across the hood of the rescue jeep, every turn marked in pencil and memorized before stepping into the darkness. When they reached the exact spot Mark indicated, the SAR team stopped to examine the scene. The blood pool had spread further from the night dew. The cloth diaper was saturated, filling the air with a sickening metallic stench. The K9s were released immediately. The first dog lunged forward to sniff the blood, then slowly followed the drag marks Mark had seen. The team switched on their high-powered lights, beams bouncing off the soaked trees in trembling ribbons. Mark and Ranger Tom walked close behind. No one spoke, only the crunch of leaves under boots, the dogs breathing, and the occasional static crackle from the radio broke the silence. The K9 led them about 200 meters, crossing a low swale and climbing a small rise. But near a narrow side trail that branched off toward the main park road, the dog suddenly stopped, circled, gave one low bark, then lost the scent completely. The handler tried bringing him back to the blood, but the dog couldn't pick up the trail again. The blood scent had been cut off completely. The handler looked at Ranger Tom and shook his head. This is where the scent got blocked, like someone put the source in a vehicle. That realization made the air feel heavier. If the woman had been loaded into a vehicle, someone else had reached the scene just minutes after Mark left, and whoever it was had acted in an incredibly narrow window, fast enough that Mark and Tom never crossed paths with them on the way back. At 1:45 a.m., a radio call came in from headquarters. A resident near the park reported seeing a dark-colored car pass the side trail about an hour earlier. The car had no headlights on, only a very faint glow like interior cabin light leaking through the windshield. The driver had thought it was just kids messing around, or a drunk trying to avoid cops. Now that detail became critical. The SAR captain ordered 2 more search teams deployed, forming 3 concentric circles from the scene. Circle 1 300 meters, SAR Team 1 Circle 2, 800 meters, SAR Team 2, Circle 3 1.5 miles, SAR Team 3, with off-road vehicles. Then the sky opened with a light rain. The first drops pattered steadily on the leaves, gradually erasing what little evidence remained. The dirt turned to slick mud, every footstep sank, and was almost instantly washed away. Cold fog clung to faces and dog fur, turning the K9's breath into white puffs. Everyone knew rain was the worst enemy when tracking faint signs. A second K9 was sent in the opposite direction along the forest edge toward Blackwater Canyon. It picked up a very faint blood scent, but it vanished after only a few meters. Clearly, whatever remained at the scene was only the beginning. The critical part, the direction the mother and baby had gone, had been wiped clean by nature, rain and time in under 2 hours. By nearly 3 a.m., the trails had become too treacherous to continue safely. The SAR captain called off the wide search, leaving a small team to guard the immediate area. Ranger Tom and Mark watched the last flashlight beams flicker through the fog and disappear as the teams headed back to the station. Beneath the pitch-black canopy, the night wind blew through the forest like an endless sigh. "If someone took her," Mark said quietly, his voice hoarse after hours of tension, "they did it fast and on purpose." Ranger Tom stared down the dark side trail where the K9 had lost the scent, and answered in a voice that couldn't hide the chill running through him. "Not an accident, couldn't be random. Someone knew exactly what they were doing." The rain grew heavier, drumming on the roof of the nearby ranger cabin like the steady ticks of a giant clock counting down. With every second, hope of finding the mother and baby alive shrank. But in that very moment, the darkness of Blackwater Falls was hiding something far bigger, something the search teams couldn't yet see, but that would haunt them for the next 3 decades. When the Tucker County forensic team arrived at the scene at first light, the rain had stopped, but the damage was obvious. Every blood trail, drag mark and footprint had been partially washed away by the Appalachian forest water. Temporary halogen lights cast harsh white glows over the wet ground, revealing the large blood pool exactly where Mark Winslow had reported seeing the young woman writhing in labor. Ranger Tom stood beside Mark, both still wired from the long night, watching the forensic team set up. Technology in 1991 was so limited that everything relied almost entirely on the naked eye and basic tools. Lead investigator Earl Whitman assigned tasks: one person to photograph with a Nikon F4 film camera, one to take notes, and 2 others to collect blood samples and sweep the surrounding area. No DNA testing, no footwear scanning, no advanced trace analysis, just meticulous manual work in the cold, muddy forest. The steady click of the film camera echoed as each shot captured the blood pool, the cloth diaper lying off to the left, and the remaining faint drag marks. Only 3 drag marks were still visible, but their edges were already blurred by rain. Whitman knew once the sun was fully up, they might disappear completely. He ordered photos from multiple angles and distances to make sure nothing, no matter how small, was missed. The team tried illuminating the ground at sharp angles to find footprints, but the mud had been churned by rain and the previous night's Asar boots, rendering everything distorted and useless. If there were prints, the rain took them, one tech remarked. Whitman just nodded. He'd seen the mountains erase crime scenes before police ever arrived. They quickly took blood samples from the edge of the large pool for basic blood type testing. The simple ABO kit returned O+. That was all 1991 forensics could determine. No age, no gender confirmation, no health status, only that the volume came from an adult, and was large enough to show the birth had been violent. The first piece of evidence sealed was the cloth diaper. It wasn't commercial, it looked like a hastily torn piece of cotton sheeting, frayed edges, 2 layers soaked through, one bright red, one brownish from rain dilution. The second item was soil mixed with blood scraped from beneath the pool, and beside the drag marks, just in case future technology could pull more information. The third was a 2-centimeter piece of pale brown fiber, found right beside the tree where Mark had seen the woman. Too small to identify, but different enough to bag. After securing the 3 main items, the team expanded the search radius 20-30 meters around the scene for any sign of the baby: more cloth, a towel, scraps of clothing, amniotic fluid, or newborn blood. Nothing. Either the rain had washed everything away, or someone had taken the baby within minutes of Mark leaving. Even more troubling, forensics couldn't determine direction of travel. The drag marks were too faint to read direction. Nothing suggested the baby had been carried away on foot, and no infant items were left behind. That matched the K9 losing the scent at the side trail. The strong likelihood was that the mother and baby had been loaded into a vehicle. If so, they were out of the park before SAR ever arrived. Whitman surveyed the area one last time, and wrote in his notebook, "No body, no mother, no footprints. Only evidence of a birth and an unnaturally rapid disappearance." He knew this wasn't an accident. No one loses that much blood, and then walks off into the dark. If the woman was still alive, someone helped her. If not, this leaned hard toward coercion or cover-up. Mark Winslow stood behind them, unable to take his eyes off the blood pool. The image of the woman begging him for help still looped in his mind. He blamed himself for leaving, even though he knew it was the only choice he had. Ranger Tom put a hand on Mark's shoulder to steady him, but couldn't hide his own unease. The deep forest along the side trail sat silent, as if it had swallowed everything, including the answers the whole team was desperate for. As the sun finally peeked over the Blackwater Falls cliffs, Whitman signaled to pack up the scene. He knew there was nothing left to collect. Less than 4 hours earlier, this had been a living emergency, a mother in agony, a newborn baby, now reduced to 3 small pieces of evidence, a blood stain, and an empty mystery. And right then, he said to Tom, low enough that only the two of them could hear, "No footprints, no ID, no missing person report. This one's not going to close easily." Immediately after finishing the crime scene documentation, Tucker County Police shifted focus to the only lead capable of expanding the investigation, the dark-colored vehicle with no lights on, reported by a witness on the night of the incident. Based on the description, long body, dark color, ran quietly, lead investigator Earl Whitman believed it was most likely a Ford LTD, a large sedan model that was extremely common in the Appalachia region in the early 1990s. He compiled a list of every Ford LTD registered within a 30-mile radius of Blackwater Falls. No exact paint color, no distinguishing marks, no license plate, meaning police had to manually check hundreds of identical vehicles. The investigation team fanned out to towns like Davis, Parsons, and Thomas, knocking on owners' doors and asking where they were that night. Most cooperated, but none showed anything suspicious, no bloodstains, no Blackwater forest mud under the chassis, no interiors that had been unusually cleaned. Meanwhile, the SAR team kept combing the woods for any sign of the mother. They located an abandoned wooden cabin on the eastern slope. Inside was thick dust and everything coated in years of neglect. The only thing that caught their attention was a faint women's shoe print in the dry dirt, but closer inspection showed it could have been there for years. No blood, no torn fabric, no signs of childbirth or hurried movement. The cabin was logged, but yielded nothing useful. By afternoon, SAR returned to the side road where the K9 had lost the blood scent. At the edge of the road they found faint tire tracks, but the ground had dried, the pattern was distorted, and the tire type couldn't be determined. The forensics team photographed it with film cameras, but had to admit the marks were too poor to match to any vehicle. Investigator Whitman expanded the search to neighboring counties, asking every garage and car wash to report any Ford LTD owners who came in for unusual interior cleaning. Throughout the day, however, nothing noteworthy was reported. One mechanic near Hendricks said he'd seen a black LTD speeding toward Route 219 in the pre-dawn hours, but it was too dark to make out the plate. By the end of the day, nearly every initial avenue had hit a dead end. No new footprints, no additional drag marks in the forest, no second witness, no traffic cameras, none existed in that area in 1991. The abandoned cabin was a false hope. The tire tracks were too faint to serve as evidence, and the Ford LTD list was endless, with none of them suspicious. Dusk fell, patrol lights cast white beams across the wet pavement. Ranger Tom stood beside Whitman, both staring toward the dark tree line where Mark Winslow had seen the woman in agony begging for help. Whitman said quietly, voice low and heavy, "No new leads. That car might as well have vanished, like it never existed, and her too." The second night after the incident ended with no trace of the mother or the baby. The case was already showing serious signs of going cold. At the end of day 2, the investigation team gathered at the Blackwater Ranger Station in a heavy atmosphere. A large paper map lay spread across the table, marked with red circles at every key location: the birth site, the side road where the K9 lost the scent, the abandoned cabin, the stretch where the witness saw the dark car glide through the fog. Despite nearly 40 straight hours of searching, huge blanks still dominated the case. Lead investigator Earl Whitman opened the meeting. She couldn't have left the scene on her own. She couldn't walk after giving birth. She couldn't disappear in just a few minutes. No one argued. That was the one thing they were certain of. A second person had to have arrived immediately after Mark Winslow walked away from the tree. Investigator Patty Rowan presented the timeline analysis. Mark ran to the ranger cabin in 12-14 minutes, and roughly the same coming back. Total absence of about 25-30 minutes. A woman who had just given birth, and lost significant blood, could not possibly have moved herself. There were no footprints belonging to her, no heavy body drag marks. Yet there were faint drag marks leading into the woods that stopped near the side road. This led to the preliminary conclusion: a physically capable person had carried or dragged the mother and baby to a waiting vehicle. Whitman wrote succinctly on the board, "Sickened person highly likely." Next they reviewed the dark-colored vehicle lead. Ranger Tom repeated the witness statement: car driving without headlights, heading out the side road toward US 219, no visible plate, color unclear because of the darkness. Checking hundreds of Ford LTDs in the area had turned up nothing suspicious. Mechanics and car washes reported no unusual cleaning jobs. Patty said, if this person wanted to disappear, they succeeded. The car might not even be registered in Tucker County. It could have just been passing through. Whitman nodded. The vehicle was the key, yet it was so vague it barely existed. An officer came in with fresh information: no missing persons reports anywhere in the region in the past 48 hours. No pregnant women missing. No one calling to look for a relative. No reports of a newborn. That silence made the room feel several degrees colder. It forced Whitman to consider the harder possibilities. The mother had deliberately hidden her pregnancy and given birth in secret. The mother had no family or had been socially isolated. The second person was someone she knew who had reason to take her away. The baby might be at the center of some conflict. None of the theories had solid evidence. To cover every angle, the team made a chart: mother taken against her will, mother panicked and willingly left the scene, baby taken, mother left somewhere else, second person is the child's father, second person trying to conceal the child's existence. Everything remained vague. At the scene, 1991 forensics had only 3 pieces of physical evidence: a blood-soaked cloth diaper, soil samples and fabric fibers, none of which could be linked to anyone because modern DNA technology didn't exist yet. That made Whitman even more convinced that without new information, the case would quickly go cold. Around 9 p.m., Whitman summarized everything. Initial conclusions: mother and baby still not located. Clear evidence of on-site birth. Involvement of a second person. Dark-colored vehicle is the primary lead, but unidentified. No related missing persons reports. When an aide asked how the incident would be classified, Whitman stood silently in front of the map covered in red ink. This wasn't an assault, wasn't an accident, and not quite a standard kidnapping. It was a mystery that began with fragile new life and ended in total disappearance. He opened the official Tucker County file and wrote in firm strokes: missing infant, unknown mother case #W9117 Blackwater Falls State Park incident. It became one of the county's rarest and most chilling missing persons files. An unnamed mother and a baby who never lived an hour, both vanishing completely as if they had never existed. When the meeting ended, no one said it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing: if nothing turned up in the first 48 hours, they might never find them. In the weeks after case #W9117 was opened, Tucker County remained in a state of wary exhaustion. Police kept canvassing the area, questioning every resident, every gas station, every store along US 219, for anyone who might have passed Blackwater Falls that night. But after just 1 month, the obvious became clear. Witness memories were already fading and distorting bit by bit. The man who saw the dark car, Earl Hemmings, initially said it had no lights, dark color, long body. 3 weeks later he thought it was black or dark blue. A month later he was certain it was jet black. By the last time police interviewed him, he couldn't even remember which direction it was headed. Another woman who thought she'd heard a baby crying in the distance later decided it was probably just wind or branches. The more statements they took, the more the pieces refused to fit together. The simple truth: human memory is not reliable enough to serve as the key once time has passed. Among the related documents, one detail later sent chills down spines more than anything else: the personal journal of young Ranger Evan McCleary. On night shifts he wrote that every time he patrolled the side road where the canine lost the scent, he felt watched. He described it as someone standing behind the trees staring right at my back. On another occasion he thought he saw slight movement behind a trunk when he shone his flashlight, but when he approached there was nothing. He even wrote, "I know someone's out there, they don't want to be found." Though there was no proof, those journal entries captured the eerie atmosphere that hung over the forest after the incident, as if someone was still lurking, watching every move the search teams made. Police compiled 14 additional citizen reports in 1991, but the results were disappointing. Most were mistaken animal noises, wind or local cars out late. Some dark car sightings didn't match the time frame. No new drag marks, no fresh footprints, nothing else connected to the abandoned cabin. The tire tracks had been washed away by rain and time, impossible to analyze. The 3 forensic items collected, blood-soaked cloth diaper, blood-soaked soil, fabric fibers, contained no identifying information. No modern DNA, no advanced analysis tools. Every piece of evidence became meaningless. Most crucially, not a single person in the entire state reported a missing relative who fit the description. No pregnant woman disappeared around that time. No hospital recorded a patient who left before delivery. No abandoned newborns found within hundreds of miles. That absolute silence made the case even harder to explain. To Whitman, it suggested the mother may have deliberately hidden her pregnancy, lived in isolation, or was in a situation where no one left was looking for her. And the second person in the woods might have known her. Spring rains continued erasing whatever traces remained. By late summer 1991, the incident area had almost nothing left to re-examine. Interagency meetings grew sparse. Mobilizing large SR teams no longer made sense without fresh leads. Park staff returned to normal patrol schedules. Tourists still asked Ranger Tom if there was any news yet, and Tom could only shake his head. Mark Winslow was re-interviewed 3 times to confirm his original account. He stuck to the same details: young woman, hair covering her face, begging for help, then gone. But even Mark's accurate memory couldn't open new investigative paths. He never saw her face, never saw anyone else, never saw a license plate, and that was the problem. By the end of 1992, one final sweep was conducted before the case was moved to inactive status. No new discoveries, no strange newborn reports, no leads matching any incidents in neighboring areas. An FBI summary was brief. No victim identity, no event sequence, no reporting party. Low solvability until forensic science advances. In his year-end report, Whitman wrote, "Case W9117 lacks victim identification structure, no mother, no infant, no weapon, no reliable witness, inactive pending new technology, or someone coming forward." Time eventually gathered dust on the file. Locals retold the story like a bizarre Appalachian tale. A woman gave birth and vanished in 30 minutes. But for the Tucker County investigators, it wasn't a story, it was a failure, a mystery, with no way out. By the end of 1992, case W9117 was officially dormant, waiting for another generation of investigators, and for technology that at the time was still out of reach. By the end of 1992, when snow had blanketed the Blackwater Forest and the last traces of the incident had completely vanished, the Tucker County Sheriff's Department conducted one final sweep. It was a formality before moving case W9117 to inactive storage. As everyone expected, it yielded no hope. No body, no new physical evidence, no additional witnesses, no missing person reports for a relative. No hospital records of a woman in labor suddenly disappearing, and most importantly, no sign at all that the baby was either alive or dead. That left the case in limbo. Legally, police couldn't classify it as a homicide. There was no body and no evidence of direct violence beyond the pool of blood at the birth site. They also couldn't call it a kidnapping. No one had been reported missing, they didn't know whether the mother had left willingly, and they had zero information about the infant's identity. They couldn't even file an adult missing person report, because there was nothing to identify the mother. For the baby, it was even more complicated. They didn't know if the infant had survived leaving the scene. They didn't know in what condition it had been carried away. No one had ever taken the baby to a hospital. There were no reports of an abandoned newborn anywhere. No adoptions or safe surrender cases matched the time frame. To the 1991 investigators, this was an unclassifiable situation, a victim entity that existed only as a pool of blood and a cloth diaper. Whitman called it a disappearance without a subject, something bizarre in the business, clear evidence that an event had happened, yet no identifiable victim to charge anyone for. The investigation dragged on for more than 8 months, circling the same loose pieces. Every forensic item collected at the scene, the cloth diaper, blood-soaked soil samples, fiber scraps, was useless in an era before widespread DNA analysis. There was no way to trace origins or connect anything to anyone in the area. The original witnesses added nothing new, memories were hazy, contradictory, details shifted over time. Countless interviews, countless nights searching, countless acres torn apart, yet the result remained absolute zero. Finally, in the winter of 1992, the Tucker County Sheriff's Office made it official, case W9117, missing infant unknown mother, suspended pending new evidence. In the county system, suspended didn't mean closed forever. It meant the case sat dormant, only to be reopened if new technology appeared or someone came forward with fresh witnesses or evidence. In reality, most suspended cases from that era were never reopened. The file was placed on the 4th shelf in storage, and cramped room lined with rusty metal filing cabinets from the 1960s. Case W9117 sat among hundreds of others, but unlike most, it had no victim photo, no family tree, no next of kin interviews. It contained only a few scene reports, Mark Winslow's statement, the evidence log, 35 prints of the blood pool in the woods, and a quiet frustration written between the lines. Though the police had to close the official investigation, the case began a new life outside in the Tucker County community. Rumors spread everywhere at the Davis Diner. People said a mysterious woman gave birth in the woods, and was dragged off into the dark. In Parsons, some swore they'd heard a baby crying while passing the trail at night. In Thomas, the story turned into a creepy tale for kids. If you go too close to Blackwater after midnight, the mother will call your name. Of course, none of it was verified, but the stories spread like classic Appalachian folklore, half truth, half myth. Park rangers started calling the case the Blackwater Mother Mystery. The name caught on after a short article in the Parsons Advocate described it as an unsolved mystery deep in the black woods of Blackwater. From then on, that became the official name on everyone's lips. But for the people who had worked the case, especially Whitman, Ranger Tom and Mark Winslow, Blackwater Mother Mystery was no legend. To them it was a lifelong obsession, a case they felt they should have solved but let slip away in the first few hours. And because there was no DNA technology, no biometric databases, no traffic cameras, no modern tracking systems of any kind, they knew the only way this case would ever be solved was to wait for the world to change. No one knew that would take 31 years. By late 1992, case W9117 officially went into a long sleep, waiting for science to become strong enough to light the darkness of Blackwater. In early 2000, when Tucker County finished building its new administration building, every old case file stored in the sheriff's office basement was ordered moved. The old storage area was damp and deteriorating. Many documents were already yellowing from moisture and mold. The transfer was meant to better preserve unsolved cases, including case W9117, which had been dormant for nearly 8 years. Case W9117 was placed in box D41, a medium-sized evidence box containing everything: the blood-stained cloth diaper, the small torn piece of diaper, fiber scraps, 35 photographs, the original cassette tape of the first night's statements, and all reports from 1991, 1992. The box was sealed and relabeled to modern storage standards. Everything seemed to go smoothly until the new warehouse became operational. In late May 2000, Sergeant Howard Briggs, who was inventorying the new storage facility, opened each box to verify contents. When he opened D41, he immediately noticed it was lighter than the weight listed in the old catalog. Briggs went through every item, counted every sealed bag, then froze. Two critical pieces of evidence were gone: the small torn corner of the diaper, previously assessed by 1991 forensics as the piece most likely to contain hair or skin cells, the original cassette tape containing Mark Winslow's and the two other witnesses' statements from the night of April 27, 1991, recorded before anything was transcribed. Everything else was still there: the main diaper, fiber scraps, photographs, scene reports. No signs of forced entry into the box, no cut or retaped seals, yet the 1997 inventory clearly showed both the diaper fragment and the cassette were present at the last check. Briggs immediately reported it to the sheriff, and an internal investigation was launched. They pulled every name with access to the old storage over the previous 8 years: archivists, detectives, maintenance staff, 2 electrical contractors, 14 people in total. But the scarier part was that from 1993, 1997, the old storage room had no complete sign-in log. Repair crews had often been given keys without detailed records. Since the box showed no tampering, the team had to consider a worse possibility: the items had been removed before the box was sealed for transfer, possibly years earlier, and no one had noticed. That fear grew when they reviewed the 1994 records, when the file had supposedly been reboxed for uniform storage. The only note read, "Reboxed for uniform storage." No name, no signature, no exact date, no confirmation of who had opened the original box and transferred the evidence. It was a fatal flaw in procedure, and that may have been exactly when the evidence disappeared. Investigators tried to track down everyone who had been in storage in 1994, but records were incomplete. No CCTV, no sign-in sheets, no individual keys. Most of the staff involved had either retired or didn't remember reboxing anything. The 3-month internal probe could not determine who opened the box, who moved the evidence when it disappeared, or why. Official conclusion: no evidence of intentional misconduct or specific negligence found. Time and perpetrator undetermined, a conclusion that basically meant the loss was inexplicable. What made it truly chilling was the nature of the 2 missing items. The small diaper piece was the one forensic techs believed most likely to retain trace evidence: hair, skin cells, things future DNA technology could analyze. The cassette tape was the raw first statements, containing details memory could never perfectly recreate later. If someone wanted the case to disappear forever, these were exactly the 2 items they would take first. If someone connected to the incident existed, these were the 2 things they would need to destroy before DNA became mainstream. Briggs, a practical man, still got goosebumps when he resealed the box. Before closing it, he added one line in red pen at the bottom: "Evidence discrepancy, origin unknown." That marked the first twist in case W9117, a twist with no answer, no culprit, no clues, but proof that this case had never been as quiet as everyone thought. 10 years later, when a new generation of forensics rose, this mysterious disappearance would come back to haunt them. But in 2000, no one realized they had just lost the pieces that could have changed the entire investigation for the next 3 decades. In 2010, after West Virginia's state forensic system received major upgrades, staff reviewed backlogged cases to see which ones qualified for new DNA technology. On that list, case #W9117 was unexpectedly flagged possible biological evidence, rare for a case almost 20 years old. The 2000 evidence loss worried many techs, but the state lab in Charleston decided to test the remaining main diaper, the only piece still properly preserved, and containing visible blood. It was the first time since 1991 that the sample would be analyzed with anything more advanced. In the Charleston lab, forensic scientist Mila Hargrove carefully cut the diaper into tiny sections for DNA extraction. The blood had turned dark brown and hardened over the decades, typical for samples stored that long. 2010-era PCR was far stronger than 1991's and could amplify degraded DNA, but it still struggled with mixed samples. 3 days later, the results came back, female DNA present, confirming it was the mother's blood. That was where the good news ended. Everything that mattered, identification, building a profile, running CODIS comparisons, was impossible. Official results: DNA heavily fragmented, insufficient loci for a legal profile, does not meet criteria for CODIS entry, unable to separate maternal and infant DNA, unable to infer age, race, or genetic traits. Hargrove wrote plainly in her report. DNA too degraded, can only confirm sex. No further analysis possible with current technology. The lab tried one more method, mini-STR, designed for ancient or damaged samples. Even mini-STR only produced 4 loci, while CODIS requires at least 13. Once again the sample was ruled insufficient for comparison. Investigator Sergeant Lou Garner read the report and stared for a long time at one sentence: mixture currently inseparable. That sentence nailed the lid on the last sliver of hope. If they couldn't separate the baby's DNA, no one could prove the infant ever existed independently of that diaper. No one could test whether the mother was taken away with the baby, or the baby was carried off alone. Garner called the lab and asked if future advances might allow retesting. Hargrove answered, possibly, but it'll take years, probably a whole new generation of DNA tech. In other words, the case could not move forward at all in 2010. The file went back to storage. Box #D41 was resealed in its place. For the department, it was the last attempt of the decade, and it had failed completely, not from lack of effort, but from technical limits. The internal memo sent to the unit was brief: insufficient data to reopen investigation. Returned to storage. In Tucker County, word that police had tried again on the Blackwater mother mystery circulated for a few weeks, then sank just like every time before. People went back to the same 2 theories: a tragedy hidden long ago, or something we'll probably never know now. Case #W9117, therefore, remained a cold case, colder than ever. Box #D41 was not opened again for the next 11 years. All that was left was waiting for the moment when DNA technology finally surpassed what 2010 could not do. And the last line of the forensic report, retained sample pending future technology, accidentally became a perfect prophecy, because that very technology, more than a decade later, would shake the entire state of West Virginia. In 2020, when West Virginia's cold case review program was reactivated, Detective Samuel Walsh, 38, was assigned to reopen case #W9117. The moment he opened box #D41, he saw the scrawled red ink note from 2000: evidence discrepancy, unknown origin. Just one short line, but to Walsh, known for his meticulousness, it was the signal of something much bigger. He read the entire 2000 evidence vault relocation report and realized no one could explain why a small piece of diaper, a cassette tape containing a witness statement, and several crime scene reports had vanished. Losing one piece of evidence was serious, losing 3 was unheard of. In 1991, DNA technology was primitive, but by 2020 even a tiny scrap of diaper could rewrite the entire case. So who took them, and why? To find out, Walsh requested access to the evidence vault entry logs from 1998, 2001. It was a thick, chaotic stack of paper, faded signatures, barely legible handwritten notes, yet Walsh patiently examined every line, cross-referencing every name against the 1990s detective roster. After 3 days of analysis, he found what he called the first footprint of an interfering hand. Investigator Harold Kinney, retired since 1997, appeared in the log 11 times over 2 years, none of which corresponded to any case that would require opening box #D41. That frequency was highly unusual. In most years, the average detective entered the vault only 2-3 times for assigned work. Kinney entered 11 times, and most notably, one visit fell right before the 1994 reboxing inventory, a time when no one could remember who had opened the box. Walsh decided to pay him a visit. The small house on the outskirts of Parsons was silent when Walsh knocked. Kinney, now in his 70s, silver-haired but still sharp, greeted him politely, yet his eyes froze the moment Walsh mentioned case #W9117. Kinney denied ever opening box #D41, said he didn't remember clearly, and explained the vault visits as inventory checks on old cases. But Walsh caught the evasion when he asked about the missing evidence. The old man paused, then changed the subject. With no proof of wrongdoing, Walsh couldn't press further, but he wrote clearly in his report, "Kinney's behavior is inconsistent. Intentional tampering with evidence cannot be ruled out." Instead of chasing a vague internal suspect, Walsh refocused on the most important goal, restoring the value of whatever remained in box #D41. Inside the box, only these items were left: large cloth diaper, not the missing piece, soil sample containing blood crime scene film photographs. All were degraded, but modern technology still offered hope. Walsh contacted the 3 strongest forensic labs in the Appalachia region: Marshall University Forensic Genomics Center, Virginia Department of Forensic Science Paragon Nanolab, a private lab specializing in sequencing degraded DNA. All 3 agreed to examine the evidence, but only Paragon expressed confidence in separating mixed DNA from nearly 30-year-old samples. Walsh immediately signed the transfer forms, and added a note: request deep sequencing, SNP panel, mixture separation, potential maternal DNA present. As the evidence box was resealed for shipment, Walsh stared at it for a few seconds, feeling as though he were handing the last remnants of a 29-year-old mystery over to modern science. While awaiting results, Walsh continued combing through the 1991 files. He cross-checked Mark Winslow's statement against that year's Ranger log, especially the entry, "Felt watched from the woods, faint vehicle lights on the service road." Everything matched the original theory. The disappearance involved third-party interference, and someone had likely acted very quickly, in the few minutes Mark left to get a ranger. Walsh began to believe the 2000 evidence disappearance was no accident, and that someone had wanted the case buried in the archives forever. But now, with next-generation sequencers, even a scrap of cloth could reveal the truth. He wrote in his duty log, "If anyone ever wanted this case buried, they never imagined 2020 DNA could move a whole mountain." Walsh had no idea that the decision to send the evidence for testing that day, seemingly just another procedural step, would become the key to unlocking secrets buried for nearly 3 decades. The results from Paragon Nanolab arrived on an autumn morning in 2020 in a high-priority email. Detective Walsh opened the 48-page PDF, and from the very first line he knew this was no ordinary report. Successfully extracted low-quantity, highly degraded DNA, using ultra-SNP sequencing. The lab had done what 2 previous generations of technicians could not: separate DNA from a mother-child blood mixture, even in minute amounts. They described the sample as extremely degraded, low concentration, environmentally contaminated, yet 2020 SNP technology was sophisticated enough to salvage valuable segments. No full CODIS profile needed, just enough data to run genetic genealogy. What Walsh read next made him stop breathing for a few seconds. Maternal lineage identified with high probability, 98.7%. The lab had built a family tree from thousands of open matches on GED match and family tree DNA. Branches were eliminated using segment length, allele sharing, and mtDNA inheritance models. In the end, every line converged on one clan in Fayette County, West Virginia, the Elwood family. Within that extended family, the lab narrowed it down by birth year, geography, ancestry markers, and especially women who had lived or appeared near Blackwater Falls in April 1991. After 6 weeks of combining public data, residence records, school records, and census maps, Paragon produced a name highlighted in red: Margaret June Elwood, born 1968, currently 52 years old. Walsh frowned. This was a name that had never appeared in any case document. No statements, no witness mentions, no missing person report. But when he opened Paragon's demographic analysis, every critical box was marked match. Age in 1991: 23, perfectly matches the young woman described by Mark Winslow. 1991 residence, Ansted, Fayette County, about a 3-hour drive from Blackwater Falls. Seasonal travel, often worked temporary jobs in the northern part of the state, never married. No children in public records, consistent with the secret birth hypothesis, but the final line in the report was the one Walsh read over and over. Hospital intake record indicates severe blood loss and hypothermic symptoms. Admitted April 10, 1991, 48 hours unaccounted for. A hospital record, exact timing, exact area, exact symptoms. Walsh immediately contacted Summersville Regional Medical Center, the facility cited by Paragon. The 1991 paper file was pulled from an old storage room, yellowed pages, doctor's illegible scrawl. But the key data was still clear. Patient, Margaret J. Elwood. Condition, acute blood loss, hypothermia, signs of uterine contractions. Note: patient would not say what happened. Extremely agitated. Admission time, April 10, 1991. 2 days after the Blackwater Falls incident, time unaccounted for. Prior to admission, approximately 48 hours. That was exactly the window during which Mark Winslow saw her giving birth alone in the woods. Walsh went back to residence records and found one more detail that added enormous weight. Elwood had worked as a waitress at a restaurant in Canaan Valley in 1991, only a few miles from the incident location. That meant she knew the forest trails, or at least wasn't a stranger to them. He underlined that line 3 times in his notebook. This was a coincidence that simply couldn't be coincidental. As Walsh built the timeline, the strangest fact emerged. Margaret had no hospital birth record, no midwife record, no medical record, anywhere in 1991, indicating pregnancy, except her physical condition, upon admission. What did that mean? Either she deliberately hid it, or someone erased the traces for her, or forced her to. When Paragon sent the supplemental analysis, they confirmed one crucial point. The DNA extracted from the diaper shared the same mtDNA markers as Margaret Elwood's maternal line, making it extremely likely she was the biological mother. Walsh stood at the whiteboard and wrote in large letters, "Why no missing report? If a woman disappeared for 2 days, gave birth in the woods, and was admitted to the hospital in critical condition, why did no one file a report? Why was the family silent? Why was the name Elwood completely absent from the 1991 investigation?" Those questions only strengthened Walsh's conviction. Someone had made sure Margaret's name never surfaced in the investigation. This breakthrough, after 29 years, was the first piece that dragged the case out of the darkness. For the first time, the mysterious disappearance had a real mother, a real identity, a clear timeline, a matching medical record, and DNA-confirmed kinship. Walsh wrote in his internal report, "For the first time since April 1991, we have a living mother. Everything changes now." And just as he predicted, everything really did begin to change from that point. Once DNA genealogy produced the name Margaret June Elwood, Detective Walsh immediately shifted to reconstructing her timeline, in the days before and after the night she gave birth in 1991. The goal was clear: figure out what happened during the missing 48 hours, the gap that likely held the entire mystery of the case. The first piece of evidence was the admission record at Somersville Regional Medical Center. The hospital noted Margaret was admitted at 3:12 a.m. on April 10, 1991, suffering from blood loss, hypothermia, exhaustion, and extreme agitation. What Walsh found most significant: she was brought in by an unidentified man who signed only the extremely common name J. Miller. The man left immediately after dropping off the patient and provided no contact information. Based on Margaret's physical condition, the 1991 attending physician estimated she had given birth 52 hours earlier, placing delivery on the night of April 8, exactly when Mark Winslow saw her alone in Blackwater Falls. The medical file matched the witness description perfectly: heavy blood loss, uterine contractions, and severe hypothermia. Walsh worked backward, checking old data sources. Employment records showed Margaret had missed her shift on April 7 at the lodge near Canaan Valley, where she waitressed. No reason, no message, she simply vanished. From there, Walsh tracked down people who lived near the Elwood family in 1991. He spoke with Norma Sutter, 76, Margaret's former neighbor in Ansted. When Walsh mentioned April 1991, she immediately recalled one particular evening, around 7 p.m. on April 7. She saw Margaret in a heated argument with a young man on Falling Run Road. She didn't hear the whole fight, but clearly remembered one sentence Margaret shouted: "I can't keep hiding this forever." The man grabbed Margaret's arm hard and pulled her toward a dark-colored car parked nearby. Then both drove off. No one else witnessed it. And most importantly, no one ever asked Norma for a statement. In 1991, Walsh flagged this as the second major red flag, after the missing evidence from box D41. An overlooked witness statement could have changed the entire case, meaning either someone was negligent, or someone deliberately kept the information from ever surfacing. Cross-referencing the timeline, evening of 4/7, Margaret argues with unidentified man. Night of 4/8, Winslow sees Margaret giving birth at Blackwater Falls. 4/8, 4/9. No trace of Margaret. Mark leaves the scene for only minutes, but when he returns, both mother and baby are gone. Early morning 4/10, J. Miller drops Margaret at the hospital and disappears. Walsh looked at the map. From Falling Run Road to Blackwater Falls State Park is over an hour's drive through mountainous forest. That produced a clear hypothesis: Margaret did not get to the birth location on her own. She was taken there. By whom? And why? Walsh went back to Norma's description of the man, a head taller than Margaret, dark hair, jean jacket, driving a dark-colored car, age late 20s to early 30s. He checked every known contact of the Elwood family in 1991. Relatives, friends, co-workers, all were reviewed. One name considered was Calvin Ridge, a distant cousin with a trouble-making history, but the physical description didn't match. Margaret's high school ex-boyfriend had left the state in 1989. Other men mentioned in school records all had alibis. Slowly, Walsh reached a conclusion: the man in the argument and the man who brought her to the hospital 48 hours later were very likely the same person, and more importantly, this person did not appear in any official record, not mentioned in a missing person report, because none was filed, not in the hospital file, never questioned by police in 1991. A nameless figure who appeared at exactly 3 critical moments, right before Margaret disappeared, while she was giving birth, and when she was taken to the hospital. Walsh wrote in his report, "Unknown male #2, the key figure in the 48-hour gap. If we find him, we'll know what happened to the child." Those 48 empty hours were no longer a vague stretch of time. They had become the central axis of the entire case, and that mysterious man was the only key that could unlock the truth of case W9117. When Margaret Elwood's identity was established through DNA genealogy, Detective Walsh knew the next step could not be delayed. He had to meet Margaret in person, the woman who had carried the secret for 29 years. The meeting was arranged through formal correspondence, and Margaret, now living in Fayette County and working at a small craft store, agreed to meet to assist the investigation, though her voice on the phone was noticeably guarded. The confrontation took place in a small interview room at the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. Margaret sat straight-backed, hands clasped on the table, eyes wary, the posture of someone long accustomed to keeping others at a distance. Walsh began with gentle questions: where she lived in 1991, what her job was then, her relationships. Margaret answered crisply, as if the responses had been rehearsed in her head years ago. When Walsh mentioned April 1991, she paused almost imperceptibly, but kept a polite smile. He asked directly, "Were you pregnant at that time?" Margaret answered instantly, without a breath of hesitation, "No, I have never been pregnant when I was young." Walsh noticed her hands tighten, knuckles going white. He continued, carefully opening a sealed envelope and placing on the table the remaining cloth diaper from the 1991 crime scene, the only piece of evidence that had survived intact from the night at Blackwater Falls. The moment Margaret saw the fragment of diaper, a visible change flashed across her face, eyes widening, lips trembling slightly, breath catching. It wasn't simple surprise, it was the look of a memory slamming back too hard. Still, she quickly regained composure and shook her head. "I've never seen that thing." Walsh said nothing, just tilted his head and watched. He had seen that reaction before. The body tells the truth before the mind can cover it. Walsh shifted direction and slid across the hospital records. "You were admitted at 3:12 a.m. on April 10, 1991, with severe blood loss, hypothermia, and uterine contractions. The doctor noted you gave no explanation." Margaret answered in a smaller voice, "I had an accident. I slipped in the woods. That's all." The explanation was paper thin and didn't match the medical description. Walsh didn't argue. He moved to the next critical piece, the witness Mark Winslow. Walsh placed the 1991 composite sketch of Mark and a summary of his statement in front of her. "Do you know or have you ever met this man?" Margaret barely glanced at it before shaking her head. "I've never met him." But Walsh had anticipated the denial. At that same moment, Mark Winslow, now 61, was waiting in the observation room. As Margaret walked past the hallway during a break, Mark stood behind the one-way glass, quietly watching. Walsh asked him, "Do you recognize the build, the walk, anything?" Mark wouldn't swear to it, but one thing he stated immediately: "That figure, it's very similar to the person I saw that night. Longer hair, different age, but that posture I remember." Walsh noted it, but drew no hasty conclusion. Memory after nearly 30 years can distort, but the match in body shape could not be ignored. Back in the interview room, Walsh asked another key question: "Did you ever own or were you ever driven in a dark-colored Ford Ltd?" If Margaret admitted yes, it would tie her to the witness who saw a similar car leaving a side road near the scene in 1991. But she answered at once, no hesitation, "No, I have never been in any Ford Ltd." The entire interview lasted nearly 2 hours. Walsh watched every detail: the way she avoided eye contact, the way she put her hands under the table when asked about the baby, the faint tremor when the diaper appeared, yet her strange calm when discussing the car. As the session ended, Margaret left him with one short sentence: "I don't know anything about what you're looking for, detective. Don't come back." Walsh closed the file, but in his investigative log, he wrote a single line: "Margaret Elwood knows far more than she's saying." Reaction to the cloth diaper confirms memory. Denial of pregnancy and denial of Mark equal sign unnatural. Motive for concealment still unclear. For Walsh, the interview was not a failure. It was confirmation. Margaret was not an outsider. She was hiding a massive truth, and the very act of hiding it was the sign they were getting very close to the heart of the case. After the tense and contradictory interview with Margaret Elwood, Detective Walsh returned to one of the oldest leads in the case: the dark-colored Ford Ltd seen in the woods the night of the 1991 incident. In the old files, the detail was barely noted: dark sedan, long body, no lights when leaving the service road. In 1991, the Ford Ltd was extremely common, so police had no way to narrow it down. But in 2020, Walsh had something they didn't: digitize DMV records. He submitted a request for every Ford Ltd registered in Tucker County and surrounding counties from 1990, 1992. The results came back with nearly 70 vehicles, but Walsh began eliminating elderly owners, registrations too far away, family cars with no connection. In the end, only 5 remained that could plausibly have traveled to Blackwater Falls. Among them, one name made him stop: Ethan Carr, Hampstead, West Virginia, Margaret Elwood's hometown. Walsh pulled old residency records. Ethan Carr, born 1961, carpenter, lived just a 15-minute drive from the Elwood home. And most importantly, Ethan had dated Margaret, according to entries in the Ansted High School yearbook. There was no indication Ethan had ever been a suspect, and no one had ever mentioned him in any report. Another gap in the 1991 investigation. Walsh decided to visit Ethan, but when he entered the house, he found Ethan, now 59, sitting on the sofa, eyes vacant. The caregiver explained, "He has mid-stage Alzheimer's. Some days he doesn't know where he is, let alone anything from 30 years ago." Walsh tried talking for a few minutes. Ethan's answers were scattered and inconsistent. When he heard the name Margaret, he frowned as if trying to dig something up, then let it go. "Name sounds familiar, but I don't remember." It was disappointing, but Walsh wasn't deterred. If he couldn't get a statement, he would find physical evidence. According to the DMV, Ethan's Ford Ltd had been sold to a Columbus, Ohio junkyard in 2004 after a minor accident. Walsh contacted the yard. Luckily, they said the frame had been crushed, but some interior parts, including the rear seat and dashboard, were still in storage due to backlog. Walsh obtained a warrant and drove to Ohio. In the dusty cold storage warehouse, he saw the gray cloth upholstered seat, rotted with age. On the torn lower edge, he spotted a dark brown stain, impossible to confirm visually, but his investigator's gut told him that was once blood. The seat was sealed and sent immediately to the lab collaborating with Paragon Nano Lab. Because the seat had been exposed to the elements for years, the chances of extracting DNA were almost zero. But Walsh hoped even a tiny fragment, a skin cell, a sweat gland, a fleck of blood, would be enough to tie Margaret to the car. After 2 weeks, Paragon sent a short email with one line: "Detective Walsh, you're going to want to see this now." The DNA report stated clearly, despite extreme degradation, SNP sequencing recovered a segment of female DNA. The segment matched the maternal DNA profile extracted from the 1991 diaper. Confidence level, 99.24%. In other words, Margaret Elwood had been inside Ethan Carr's Ford Ltd at a time very close to the night of the disappearance. This was the first piece of evidence in 29 years linking Margaret to the suspect vehicle. It did not prove Ethan drove her into the woods, but it proved his car was directly involved in Margaret's movements during the period she vanished. Walsh reread the report, making notes on every line. The key wasn't Ethan. His Alzheimer's made him useless as a witness, but one simple question that destroyed Margaret's entire story. Why is your DNA on the seat of a car you swore you had never been in? Margaret said she had never been in a Ford Ltd. The physical evidence said the opposite, which meant either she lied, or she was hiding part of the timeline, or someone else used that car to drive Margaret, and she refused to name them. Walsh closed the file and wrote in his log, "Vehicle confirms role in disappearance. Margaret Elwood actively concealing Ltd connection. Reason unknown, but this is the first piece proving she was not abandoned in the woods, she was driven there." A 1991 lead, once considered hopeless, had suddenly become the breakthrough of 2020, and that rotting Ford Ltd in Ohio opened a new investigative path, one that would lead Walsh straight to the mystery man who appeared during the 48 hours. Margaret was missing. The search warrant for Margaret Elwood's home was signed quickly after the DNA from the Ford Ltd seat proved she had been in the car around the time of the disappearance. When the team arrived in Fayette County, Margaret simply stood off to the side on the porch, not lashing out, but clearly more tense than any previous time Walsh had seen her. The house was small, tidy, but completely lacking any personal touches. Walsh felt it immediately. The person living here was used to keeping everything hidden. The team split up and searched bedroom, basement, shed, attic. Nearly an hour passed with nothing remarkable. Then an officer discovered an old poster covering a section of cabinet paneling. Behind it was a rusted military green metal box. Walsh opened the box, and the room went silent. Inside were only 3 items, but each one hit the 29-year-old case like a bomb. The second piece of cloth diaper, listed as missing since 2000, it was exactly the fragment recorded as lost. Threadwear, weave pattern, size perfect match. This didn't just prove the evidence hadn't vanished on its own, it had been removed and kept outside the system for nearly 3 decades. Walsh knew instantly, this was evidence of serious misconduct, and the person holding it, Margaret, an unfinished letter on old paper, in shaky pencil, "I'm sorry for having," nothing more, no addressee, no explanation, an unfinished confession, or a letter she started, and then got scared to send. Walsh watched Margaret when he held up the letter. She looked away, lips trembling. A 1991 photograph, a pregnant woman, but not Margaret. This was the most shocking. The photo showed a woman about 7-8 months pregnant, light blonde hair, round face, high nose bridge, nothing like Margaret. In the background were trees very familiar to the Ansted area. On the back, in faded pencil, March 91, "Don't let anyone know." Even without deep analysis, Walsh knew this was no random keepsake. This was a trace of the real mother, someone never mentioned in any 1991 report. The evidence was sealed and sent immediately to Paragon Nanolab. Results came back 3 days later, and stunned the entire office. Blood on the second diaper fragment matched the infant blood, infant doe. Maternal DNA from the second diaper matched the Elwood maternal line, but the match was not maximum, meaning Margaret was not the biological mother, only a close relative of the actual mother. This was the biggest twist since Walsh reopened the case. New conclusions formed. The woman who gave birth in 1991 was not Margaret. Margaret was closely related by blood to the real mother, Elwood line. Margaret kept the missing diaper fragment, meaning she deliberately hid something. The photo of the pregnant woman was a new character, never in the 1991 files. The unfinished letter showed Margaret once wanted to tell the truth, but couldn't bring herself to. When Walsh confronted Margaret about the metal box, she leaned against the wall, face ashen, but her words were still only, "I don't know anything about that stuff." Her voice was dry, small, but her eyes held real terror, not the terror of being caught lying, but the terror of someone protecting a secret big enough to destroy her entire life. Walsh knew she was lying, and more importantly, she wasn't just hiding her own story, she was hiding someone else. He opened his notebook and cross-referenced everything they now had. The mystery man from the 48 hours, Margaret was missing. Ethan Carr's Ford Ltd., the pregnant woman in the photograph, the diaper, containing the infant's DNA, the metal box hidden for nearly 30 years, everything pointed to one conclusion: Margaret was not the victim. She was the cover-up, but covering for whom? And where did the baby infant doe go? As he left Margaret's house, Walsh wrote a final line in his investigative log: "We've been looking in the wrong direction for 29 years. The real mother has never even been named." Case W9117 had just entered a new phase, with a new mystery, a new person, and a heavier question than ever. Who is the pregnant woman in the photograph? After discovering the metal box in Margaret's house, and confirming it contained a diaper fragment with infant doe's DNA, along with a photograph of a pregnant woman taken in 1991, Detective Walsh understood that to crack the case, he had to accomplish what no one had managed in 29 years: determine the fate of the child. In early 2021, he returned to Blackwater Falls State Park with witness Mark Winslow to reconstruct the scene. Mark, now over 60, still remembered exactly the spot where he had seen the young woman give birth, a sunken clearing among tall trees, where moonlight had poured down on that fateful night in 1991. From that position, Walsh used topographic maps and the direction Mark had once described as the drag mark to sketch the most likely path of movement. He realized the drag trail matched a narrow footpath that led down to a creek before splitting into two branches that the 1991 search teams had never thoroughly checked because heavy rain had turned the ground to mud and erased all traces. This time, Walsh refused to leave any area unsearched and decided to deploy modern technology unavailable in 1991. A new generation ground-penetrating radar, GPR capable of detecting subsurface anomalies, plus a human remains detection K9 team HRD K9. On the day of the search, a gray, moisture-laden sky made the atmosphere eerily similar to the night of the incident, but this time they had better, more precise tools and one single goal: find infant Doe. The K9 team took the lead, sweeping both branches of the trail while the GPR was moved continuously across strips of ground. For hours there was nothing, but in the afternoon, as the team pushed deeper into the right-hand branch, a K9 named Luma suddenly changed demeanor. She stopped, circled, then gave short, rhythmic barks, the unmistakable alert for the scent of decomposition even after so many years. Walsh signaled the GPR over to that spot, and after just a few passes the screen revealed an anomaly, a small void about 40–45 centimeters below the surface, with differently compacted soil above it, classic signs of a shallow grave. The excavation team began digging by hand to avoid damaging whatever lay beneath. The soil was thick, cold and wet, clinging to their gloves, but within minutes, an investigator exclaimed when his shovel hit something softer than dirt, a rotted piece of fabric, followed by tiny bone fragments so fragile they could crumble at the slightest pressure. When everything was laid out on the stainless steel tray, the entire team fell silent. After 29 years in darkness, infant Doe had finally been found. The remains were immediately transferred to the West Virginia Medical Examiner's office for analysis. The results confirmed the bones belonged to a newborn, who died within 24–48 hours of birth. There were no signs of trauma, no fractures, no strangulation marks, no foreign objects in the airway. The baby had not been assaulted. Cause of death: environmental exposure, hypothermia and exhaustion, after being abandoned in the woods without care. This was not a direct homicide, but an act of abandonment, resulting in death, a crime of neglect, yet still a serious felony. More importantly, the discovery proved what Walsh had suspected all along: the mother who gave birth in the woods could not possibly have carried the baby 400 meters in her exhausted, bleeding, hypothermic state. That meant there had to be a second person. And that person was the man who appeared during the 48 hours Margaret went missing. The baby's death occurred near a hidden section of trail that matched the direction a dark-colored car was seen leaving the area without headlights in 1991. Every piece fit. Margaret was not the birth mother. The woman in the photograph was the real baby, had existed and died, and unknown male #2 was the only link capable of carrying the infant away from the birth site before abandoning it in the forest. As Walsh stood at the excavation site, looking down at the carpet of dry leaves, he felt that this seemingly nameless patch of woods had guarded the secret of 3 decades. He whispered, as if making a promise to the child just found, "We won't let this be buried again." And for the first time since the case began in 1991, Walsh knew he was on the right path, the one that would lead him to the mystery man and the real mother who, for 29 years, had never been named. The trial of Margaret Elwood opened in West Virginia in the summer of 2022, marking the end of a journey that had lasted more than 3 decades. After infant Doe's remains were located thanks to GPR and the K9 team, after the metal box containing the long-missing diaper fragment and the 1991 photograph of a pregnant woman was found in Margaret's home, and after every DNA result showed she was not the biological mother, but was directly involved in concealing the truth. Prosecutors charged her with 2 counts: concealment of birth and negligent homicide. In the small Parsons courtroom, Margaret appeared gaunt and refused to meet anyone's eyes. The prosecution began by reconstructing the entire case: the diaper fragment found inside the metal box, evidence that had once vanished from police storage, the photograph of the pregnant woman with the handwritten note, "Don't let anyone know," DNA proving the real mother was an Elwood relative, but not Margaret, neonatal blood on the second diaper fragment, matching infant Doe, and Margaret's DNA on the seat of the Ford Ltd., the car tied to her movements on the night the baby was born. Each piece of evidence landed like a hammer blow, silencing the room. Together they painted a story so clear it was impossible to refute. Though she had not given birth to the child, Margaret had been present in the chain of events that led to its death, and had deliberately hidden the truth for 29 years. Lead investigator Walsh took the stand and walked the court through everything from the moment the DNA trace was discovered, to the instant the shallow grave was found 400 meters from the birth site. The prosecution concluded that the woman who gave birth could not have been Margaret, but Margaret had unquestionably helped hide the real mother, and most damningly, had deliberately kept the single most crucial piece of evidence, the missing diaper fragment, until it was discovered in her possession. Keeping that evidence could not be explained as accident or oversight. It showed intent. Furthermore, her lifelong refusal to contact police, to report anything, and her creation of a 30-year information void, proved she was not a mere bystander. The defense countered by painting Margaret as a victim of coercion. For the first time in nearly 2 years of investigation, she confirmed the existence of the second man, claiming Ethan Carr, someone she once knew, and the owner of the Ford Ltd., had forced her to participate in the 1991 events. According to Margaret, Ethan had driven her to Blackwater Falls to help another pregnant woman give birth, and after the baby was born, Ethan was the one who carried the infant away. "I was forced," she said, voice trembling. "I had no choice," but the prosecution immediately shredded the story for lack of any corroboration. No witnesses, no documents, no statement from the real mother to compare, and most critically, when asked why she kept the diaper fragment for 3 decades, why she hid the photograph of the pregnant woman, and why she never once went to the police, Margaret offered no convincing explanation. The prosecution dismissed the blame shifting to Ethan with a simple, devastating argument: a coerced person does not keep evidence for 29 years. A coerced person does not hide documents, does not conceal the identity of the real mother. A coerced person does not live with a secret kept that perfectly. The truth was that Ethan Carr could neither respond nor defend himself. End-stage Alzheimer's had left him almost completely incapacitated, and under the law he lacked the capacity to stand trial or even be charged. That made Margaret's story impossible to verify, and to the jury, looked like a last-minute attempt to shift responsibility. Though Margaret insisted Ethan was the one who carried the baby away, the prosecution argued it did not matter who physically moved the infant. What was undeniable was that Margaret kept the secret, kept the evidence, and prevented the truth from emerging. And that alone was enough to convict. When the trial reached its 8th day, the courtroom air was thick. The prosecution closed with the words, "Infant Doe did not die from violence. The baby died from being left behind." And Margaret Elwood's 29 years of silence is what kept that truth buried. The jury did not deliberate long. After just over 6 hours, they returned with verdicts of guilty on both counts. Margaret showed little reaction. She simply closed her eyes, as if she had known the outcome for years. The judge sentenced her to 17 years in prison, 5 years for concealment of birth, 12 years for negligent homicide. The sentence not only closed Margaret's chapter, but carried its own tragedy. the real mother remained unidentified, and the man present during infant Doe's final hours could never be prosecuted because of his illness. After the trial ended, Detective Walsh wrote in his final report, "Justice came late, but it came at last. Infant Doe is no longer buried in silence." Margaret Elwood's conviction closed a 31-year-old case, but in Tucker County, nothing truly felt finished. Instead of relief, the community was left unsettled. The woman who gave birth at Blackwater Falls in 1991 was not Margaret. The evidence that once disappeared had been in her house all along, and most painfully, the baby's real mother still had no name. The small town that had lived with rumors for decades now had to accept that everything they thought they knew was only a tiny fraction of the truth. After the trial, Detective Walsh was repeatedly asked the same three questions he himself could not answer. Who was the real birth mother? What was Ethan Carr's true role? Who removed the evidence in 2000? Those questions became the community's new obsession. People talked about them in diners, at the grocery store, even in church. If it wasn't Margaret, then who was the woman in the woods? Why did no one report her missing that year? And was the stolen evidence taken to protect the actual perpetrator or a family member? Ethan Carr's role made everything stranger still. Ethan, owner of the Ford Ltd., and the man who appeared while Margaret was missing, could no longer answer anything because of end-stage Alzheimer's. If Margaret was telling the truth, Ethan may have coerced or assisted someone. Yet Walsh had no evidence Ethan had ever been violent or involved in abandoning a newborn. It was equally possible Margaret had used Ethan's name to divert attention from the real mother. Everything about Ethan remained a shadow. Everyone could see it. No one could grasp it. The mystery of the missing evidence from 2000 opened yet another strange branch. If Margaret took the diaper fragment, why was there no record in the evidence log? If she didn't, why did it turn up in her house? And why would anyone want to keep or hide evidence in what appeared to be an ownerless missing child case? The 2000 internal investigation never identified a culprit, but clearly someone had deliberately created a gap in the file that delayed the case for years. 2 weeks after the trial, the Tucker County Sheriff's Office received an unmarked envelope containing a single sheet of white paper, with a short sentence handwritten in blue ink. "I know the real mother is still alive." No signature, no clues. Walsh read the words over and over, searching for emotion or tone, desperation or threat, but found nothing. The letter was sealed into the file, as a loose piece powerful enough to reignite the entire mystery. The case also became a textbook example in West Virginia, forensic circles of a cold case delayed, not by lack of technology, but by personal relationships, and the things left unsaid in small towns. The 1991 photograph of the pregnant woman, definitely not Margaret, became the strangest icon: an unnamed face, a huge belly, and an entire life that vanished within 48 unwitnessed hours. Though a verdict had been reached, Walsh refused to close case #Divil 9117. In his final report he wrote, "We found the child. We know what happened in the woods, but the woman who gave birth, the one who suffered the most, still has no name." And that was what kept him from closing the case in his heart. In Tucker County, the name Blackwater Mother Mystery spread once more, this time not as urban legend, but as an open wound. People wondered whether the real mother might still be living somewhere in West Virginia, quietly following developments, or buried in a completely new life, evading the past with absolute silence. The case was officially closed, but the biggest questions were not. Blackwater Falls had given back infant Doe, yet the woman who brought that child into the world, the central figure of the entire tragedy, remained a nameless silhouette. And until that person steps forward, or the truth finally surfaces, case #Divil 9117 will continue to haunt the West Virginia woods as a reminder that some secrets cannot be buried by time. Looking back at the story, West Virginia, 1991 cold case solved. Arrest shocks community. The lesson is not that there was an evil killer, but that small choices and small silences accumulated into a tragedy that lasted 31 years. In today's America, where we talk constantly about justice and accountability, this story touches the dark corners society still avoids: shame, domestic violence, and the culture of silence in small communities. Margaret did not directly kill the baby, but by keeping the metal box with the missing diaper fragment and the 1991 photograph of the pregnant woman, and staying silent for decades, she became part of the crime. She may have been coerced, she may have feared Ethan, but choosing silence instead of going to police, doctors, lawyers, or any women's support organization turned her from victim into accomplice. In a country with hotlines, shelters, and legal aid, 31 years of silence is no longer just fear, it is responsibility. The way Tucker County treated the whole thing as the Blackwater mother mystery, retelling it like a campfire ghost story, instead of asking hard questions, was its own form of indifference. Someone may have recognized the woman in the photograph, may have wondered about a relative who mysteriously disappeared in 1991, but out of fear of trouble or breaking family structures, they stayed quiet. That still happens in many American families. You know something is wrong, but don't rock the boat. The practical takeaway from this story is: if you know or suspect someone is pregnant, in dangerous circumstances, being abused or controlled, do not treat it as private business. Encourage them to get medical care, document things, call a hotline, or if necessary, call the police. If you have information about a missing person or a child who suddenly vanished from a family, share it with authorities or anonymous tip lines. The seemingly small decisions, like Mark going back to report to the ranger that night, or Detective Walsh refusing to ignore the evidence missing line in the file, are what create justice. Conversely, Margaret's silence, and the anonymous letter that came decades too late, show that sometimes the cruelest thing is not doing wrong, but knowing something is wrong, and doing nothing at all. Thank you for following this 31-year journey to uncover the truth in the Blackwater mother mystery. If you'd like to keep walking with me through stories that have never been told, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. See you in the next journey, as we unravel other mysteries, where even the smallest clue can change everything.